So welcome today to this integrating your ERP to TraceLink with link actions. So this is a tech talk that John LeBlanc is going to be presenting. Before I do hand over to John, I am going to just go through a little bit of a bio and introduction to John, and then our class guidelines and our antitrust guidelines. So John is a cross-functional platform partnership and product leader. He's got over 15 years of experience leading technical developer advocacy, education and platform operation teams and initiatives. At the moment, he is the Vice President of Platform Success Services at TraceLink. He's an O'Reilly author, technical Emmy Award recipient, and former board member of the OAuth, OpenID, and Open Social Open Source specification groups. And as mentioned, John is going to be talking about integrating your ERP to TraceLink with link actions. This session is currently being recorded as well, but if you do have any questions, please feel free to put questions in the chat box at the throughout the session, or I'm going to unmute the lines at the end of the session as well. And just for our antitrust guidelines, our classes are public, so we just ask you not to engage in any discussions about pricing, deal making, promoting, selling, or any other activities which could be seen as anti-competitive. If you feel they are approaching these boundaries, just say so, and we will stop the discussion until TraceLink Legal Counsel is consulted before proceeding. And just for our class guidelines, again, because they are public, our classes are public, and we do have a limited time frame, we just ask you not to initiate any company-specific examples. Having said that, if you do have any questions about any use cases that we might need to take offline, please raise them and we'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have. Okay, so I'm going to pass over to John now, and I will speak in a moment about any questions, and I've got a couple of questions myself. Thank you, John.
It sounds good. Appreciate the intro, Laura. So what I am going to go through today is a little bit on the different integration methods that are available at TraceLink. We're going to focus on a brand new bit of technology that has just been announced by TraceLink 2 to 3 weeks ago, called link actions. And I'll dig into a little bit about what those are, what the components are, how they all connect. So ideally, what you should be able to get from this session is really just a overall picture of how to integrate external systems into TraceLink. So if you are working within an ERP, WMS, an external platform, and you want to work there in conjunction with Mint within TraceLink through the UI or any of the other TraceLink applications, that you can do so. So as we take those steps going towards that end goal, and that overall picture, I'm going to start by taking a look at what the different ways that we integrate today are. So the different ways that you could potentially tie your systems into TraceLink and work at more of a machine scale as opposed to a human scale that you would through the UI. Once we go through there, I'll start to dig down into some of those integration options. The first one being those link actions that we were talking about, the API integrations specifically towards a platform, a little bit into our file exchange methods, so the transform methods that actually the link actions utilize as well. So it dives it down a little bit deeper into what link actions are. And then I always like to solidify some of those initial theories or architectures that we're running through with some practical examples. So what I'll do is I will run through a couple of customer scenarios just at a high level based off of what their presumed integration would be, and then we'll make a few recommendations based off of the integration options. So this should give you an overall picture into which one might be best for you. Now, the way I like to start this conversation is really just to solidify some of the way that TraceLink works today. So you might have seen these slides before or pieces of these slides. This is really just trying to solidify the TraceLink value proposition of integrate once and interoperate with everyone. That a company that is onboarding on top of the TraceLink network and integrating within their downstream partners, the only thing that they really have to do is set up that single connection into TraceLink. Now, the way that this all works behind the scenes is this single connection, the data coming in multiple different formats. It might be an EDI X12 artifact, might be an IDOC, it might have direct through the UI, it might be through an API connection. Doesn't matter at the end of the day, and it doesn't matter what your data format is. That what we do with that data is we transform it once it comes into the TraceLink system into an agnostic format in TraceLink called a canonical. Now, the reason why we do this is because it genericizes any of the data coming in. It creates this container that we can then convert over to any required format. So you might be working within a NetSuite ERP, communicating through APIs, sending in your data that way. As let's say JSON. And then your downstream partner might have a SAP implementation and they are working through IDOCs. So on the outbound, when you're sending your data into TraceLink, perhaps into the Mint application, and then going outbound to your downstream partners, we can convert it to whatever format they're working with. So this is really the value proposition, because if you were to do this yourself and have, let's say, a dozen different trade partners all working in different systems and with different data, you would have to maintain a dozen different individual connections and converting the data yourself through to those individual connections, or have them all consume your data in some way and then converting it themselves. So ultimately, that's the value proposition that we're looking at. And the last piece of that puzzle where we wanted to connect was the ERPs, the warehouse management systems, the quality management systems, any platform that exists that communicates via APIs, because that is a different type of format of data coming through. So that's really what we're going to be talking about today, is expounding upon that overall concept with different integration methods. And if we dig down into that a little bit, the reason why we can do all of this today is because of how the TraceLink system is built out. That each company in and of themselves, when they are on board on top of TraceLink, is a verified node on the network. And all company identifiers that would allow it to link to other partners have been added into that verified node. So they become a verified entity that we can connect to any single partners and then communicate back and forth. So as I had mentioned in the previous slide, each company within the network maintains just that single connection into TraceLink. They are sending data in the format that they choose into TraceLink, and then TraceLink handles the output in whatever format that a downstream partner would need. And that is how we basically set up the trade partner connections and the configuration. So once the company is onboarded, we set up their downstream trade partners, and then they connect through into the network. Each company will manage their own data and map their different data formats directly within their trade partners. So they specify those configuration details, and then our services department helps to augment the internal teams to manage those traditional functions of mapping the data back and forth, transforming the data, maintaining those connections. So it's all handled through the TraceLink network and the services department. So that's a little bit of details that gets us started. So it paints the overall picture of the North Star of what TraceLink has provided and is continuing to grow and provide. Which brings us to our next bit of the topic, and where we really start to get into the conversation that this Tech Talk is geared around, which are the different integration options that exist right now within TraceLink. So What I've tried to do is paint an overall picture of the different ways that we can use it. I wanted to start with the right-hand side here through the UI. Even though it's not really an integration option, I like to present it as a different modality on how to work with our applications at TraceLink because it helps to paint the overall picture. So this is something that is available to everyone. The TraceLink UI, if you have access to Mint or any other applications at TraceLink, uh, you will always have access to the UI. Whether you have an ERP, an external system, an EDI system that you're trying to connect into to the system. If you are just working with email and phone calls and transmitting data in a non-standardized format, you can always rely on the product UI. This allows you to work at human scale. It allows a person to go into the application, input the data, export the data, view the reporting, and work at that level. So that's and that is important because ultimately, no matter what integration option we're looking at, the UI is how you see it all. It becomes the source of truth because all data that's coming in from every automated connection externally through an ERP or through an EDI system or what have you will ultimately be viewable through the UI. Now, that's where we start to get to these other integration options with that in mind. This is what the context of this talk is about. In the middle, we have our file exchange. Now, what these are at the end of the day are just logic in the middle to transform data. They're features called transforms. And really what they're doing is they are taking whatever data that's coming into the system in whatever format you choose, and it is transforming it into that agnostic TraceLink canonical format. This is how our system is built. This is how it works. This is how we can maintain this agnostic network engine that allows people to connect into it. And it has been hardened for years. Now, they connect in a slightly different way than some of the other integration options. So it's through an SFTP or an AS2 connection. It can handle data both inbound and outbound. And the main item to highlight here with the transforms is it is taking a completed transaction in a document format. So let's say a purchase order in an EDI X12 format as a holistic document, and it is converting it. So that's really how the network works. Now, what we realized is that many of our customers might be working in an enterprise resource planning system. They might be working with their warehouse management system. They might be working with for instance, the DHL platform and wanting to connect directly into there. And those are all handled through API connections. They're not through these SFTP or AS2 connections. And the other challenge there is that these systems, let's say a NetSuite, MS Dynamics, an Infor M3, all of these systems, the transaction itself, so a purchase order, an invoice, an inventory balance report, all of those, that data to make up that completed document might live on 3 or more different tables within the enterprise resource planning system. So this file exchange expecting a completed document and then working through SFTP and AS2 does not really fit the needs of connecting into systems like that or building out those integrations. And that is why link actions exist. So they provide this direct API connection towards those platforms to be able to consume that data. They're highly configurable so that they can extract the data automatically from that system of record, the ERP that the customer might be using, and automatically pull that into Mint and then convert it through a transform. So behind the scenes, the link actions are still using the file exchange. So they provide additional dynamic logic on top of the transforms that allows you to just automate out the connection of data and the transmission of data in and out. But if we're looking at this from a high level, if you're taking anything from the slide, the UI works at human scale. These integration options will work at both human and machine scale. So that becomes important if you start to have many transactions that you want to send into the system. All right. So let's take a step down on the API integration. So this is where I want to explore link actions in a little bit more depth, because that is really the newest piece of technology that is coming out of TraceLink, and it is going to be a game changer for many customers because it allows them to work in the system that they choose, in the way that they choose, and then automatically pull the data back into TraceLink, right now into Mint. So if we're looking at it, as I've mentioned, the link action itself provides that direct method of syncing data between that customer system, that external system, and Mint. And it automatically syncs the data in and out through things called link actions. So what that also provides is a way of actually setting up the interval on how often it should sync within the system. So the data that is synced is much like the transforms. It's transactional in nature. So your purchase orders, your ASNs, your invoices, what have you, they are complete documents. But like I had said before, in the ERP, they might be within multiple different tables. So what the link action in itself is doing is extracting the data from multiple tables, pulling it all together into a single document, and then pushing it back through a transform to transform it into this agnostic format that TraceLink utilizes. One thing to note about link actions is, and this is really where it becomes very different than what you might be familiar with connectors. So a connector being, let's say I hook up my Workday system with some external planning service and it handles the connection between those two. I might have to set it up just once for that entire system, but that connector is very opinionated about what features are synced back and forth. So the difference between link actions and a traditional connector network that you might be familiar with is that link actions or a single link action is built to perform a single action. So it takes a really just a hyper-focused approach on a single transaction. So let's say a purchase order, and then it's targeted towards a single system like a NetSuite and a single direction, either inbound into Mint or outbound from Mint into the in or out of the system of record. And then that in turn is configured for each of the customers or partners that it is built for. So that means that it maintains a very singular focus on exactly the need of that particular transaction and that particular customer instance. It also means that we can configure how often the polling happens for that transaction. So a typical integration, if you are, let's say, working with a typical PO flow. So you might have a PO, a purchase order acknowledgement, you might have an invoice, an ASN, you might have different transactions like these. These would all be individual link actions. And we can configure them so that they are polling the system that you're using, like a NetSuite, on different intervals. So I might be polling for new POs every hour. I might be polling for new invoices every day. So you can configure them on that level of granularity, and they are all configured for that transaction, which makes them very configurable and valuable for your business needs, and just allows them to scale with your needs. All right, I like to talk through this slide a little bit when I'm talking about the flow of how link actions actually work with all the behind the scenes pieces towards it. There's a lot here. So really what I'll do is I'll talk about this at a little bit of a high level and it should paint the picture of how data comes in and out of the system and how everything is relatively connected. So let's say we have a customer here, an MAH, that wants to connect to their supplier. They're both using MS Dynamics 365. Let's say they're using Business Central within Dynamics 365. let's say the MAH has a very customized version of Dynamics 365. So a purchase order to them also includes some particular data that's only relevant towards their company. And then let's say the supplier is working with an out-of-the-box Dynamics 365. So a purchase order to them is really just the way that it comes within Business Central. So there's no changes on that side. Now, the first thing that we're going to do within a link actions, what we're going to do, or we need to do, if we are sending a purchase order into Mint and then back out to the supplier, what we are going to do is you have to configure link actions for purchase order inbound for the MAH and a purchase order outbound for the supplier. So what we would have to do within this MAH is, since they have a very customized instance, we would take our standard purchase order that has been a purchase order link action that has been created for Microsoft Dynamics, and then we would customize it for their needs. So we would get details about the customizations of their Dynamics 365 instance, and then we would add it into a custom link action for them. Now, the supplier would be a lot easier during the configuration, because since they have an out-of-the-box implementation, all we can do, or all we would need to do, is just take their purchase order or the purchase order link action, and then configure it for their needs. Is there Jessica? Did you have a question? No. Okay. I'll continue. So that's really what the MAH and the supplier both need to do when when they are first configured into the system, and that's all they need to do to set up link actions. Is they provide us a way of polling their system. So this is usually a service account user that only has access to the data, the purchase order data that needs to be extracted or sent back to the system, and that's how the configuration happens. Now, what happens behind the scenes is, on the TraceLink network, what we do is, on a regular interval, so this might be every minute, hour, day, what have you, however you want to configure the purchase order, the link action will reach out to the MAH, to their Dynamics 365 instance, and say, are there new purchase orders that have been added? If there are, the purchase orders go back to the link actions, and they pass it through to what we call our B2B transaction processing layer. Really, what this is doing at the end of the day is it's figuring out which TraceLink application to send it to, tying it to a particular company, so the MAH, and where it needs to go down to the supplier, and it's transforming the data. So it's transforming it from what a purchase order looks like in Dynamics 365 over to this agnostic canonical format that TraceLink uses. So that will flow into Mint. And now in the Mint UI, you can now view those purchase orders. So that's how the UI becomes the center point of truth for all of us. Now, the journey is not completed yet. So now Mint needs to send the outbound. So it'll work exactly the opposite way. So it goes back through the transaction processing layer, and we convert it from the TraceLink canonical over to what a PO looks like in the supplier's Dynamics 365 instance. So that's standard purchase order. It gets sent to the outbound link action for the supplier, which passes it through to the supplier's Dynamics 365 instance. So that's how the flow works end to end. Now, you can replicate this however you want with any different transaction type coming in and out. They all flow through the same layers, and they all do the same things at the end of the day. Now, the only thing that really changes on a day-to-day basis is really what data is pulled from these link actions. So, or pulled or sent to. So we could send it through to a supplier's Dynamics 365 instance. We could send it somewhere else. So even though it is configured for Dynamics 365, we can send it to another platform that the supplier chooses, maybe a holding pattern until they enter it in themselves within Dynamics 365. So those capabilities are all possible within link actions, which is why they're so dynamic and configurable. So that's the flow. But if we break that down into its individual pieces, and we look at what a link action is at the end of the day, it has three main components. The link action framework it runs the link actions. So what it has is it has the configuration details on how to connect to an external platform like a NetSuite, an MS Dynamics, DHL's platform, something like that. So it maintains the configuration for those platforms, and then it runs the link actions on whatever interval they're set to link to run on. The link action itself is a small little bit of JavaScript that makes the API calls out to the platform. And really, the only other thing it does is it passes the data through to that B2B transaction processing layer to be converted. Then you have at the bottom of that stack is the transform. So once that data comes from that external system and it needs to be converted into TraceLink's agnostic canonical format, the transform does that work. So as you can see, transforms at the end of the day, even though link actions are a new product, transforms are still at the core of this technology, because that is, again, how the TraceLink platform works and how they maintain an agnostic approach towards this integrate once and interoperate with everyone approach. All right, so that's link actions from a high level. Now let me dig down a little bit more into transforms, because there's more here that we can explore. So you can use link actions in a dynamic way, or you can just use transforms. So you do not necessarily have to utilize the link actions to be able to transform data into the systems. If you have a piece of transaction data, so a purchase order already within an EDI system, an X12 Edifact, you already have an IDOC, you already have it in OData format, you already have it in some sort of a standard format where it's a complete transaction. Transforms in that case are probably the better method for you, because if you are already exporting this data into a singular format, then transforms are the perfect way of getting the data into TraceLink systems. So that is the entire reason, as I had mentioned, how we can become this agnostic engine, that the transforms do that heavy lifting of converting the data in and out between the whatever formats is coming in externally into the agnostic formats that everyone utilizes internally. So the other thing to note about transforms in and of themselves is they actually have two different flavors, a standard and a custom transform. Now, at the end of the day, you're just going to see a transform, but I like to talk about them a little bit more because they have different functions. And they have different teams behind them that are building out the systems. So much like as I was talking through link actions, how I had said when we configure that downstream supplier and we utilize the standard purchase order link action that we had created out of the box, but for the MAH we had to customize it, right? The same thing works in the exact same fashion with transforms. So we have a team that builds out what are called standard transforms in standard formats. So three of the common formats that they've been built out for within for Mint for consuming data and exporting would be X12, Edifact, and IDOC. We also have standard transforms in different formats like CSV. And so there are very, very much standard transforms that exist that what they're trying to do is they're trying to look at, for all these formats that come in, what are the possible permutations of a purchase order or an invoice, any of the warehouse transactions? What does a standard purchase order look like, or what can it be? And what they try to do is map out in what we call our standard canonical, all of those potential formats. Now, what they're trying to do at the end of the day is meet the demand of 95% of the customers out there. So they build out these standard transforms, and we upload them into what's called our standard catalog. So if you're using an out-of-the-box solution that doesn't have customization, or you're using an X12 document in the way that it comes, you can just use these standard transforms out of the box. There's no configuration that's needed. It will just take over. And I'll show you how that works in just a second. Now, if you do have any customization, that's when this custom transform team comes in. So what they're going to do is they are going to get samples from the customer and just saying, what does a purchase order look like in your system and what you're transferring in your iDoc or your X12 document. And they're going to take these standard transforms that have been created and they are going to customize them. They are going to add in these configurable values and then map them into our canonical in different ways. Depending on the business needs of the customer, we will map that data in or we will ignore the data coming in. It really depends on the configuration. And then we upload these into the customer catalog. Now, the difference between the SDCM, as I had said, and the CTCM, the customer catalog, is that standard transforms are available to everyone. If there's no customization, then the standard transforms are used. If there is a custom version of, let's say, that purchase order transform for X12 documents that you're sending in, it will use the custom transform instead. So this is the way it works. If we are walking through the system and we are walking through the flow, let's say we have on one side the customer and they have an EDI system transmitting X12 documents. And on the other side, we have Mint. So they're transferring the data into Mint. Now, what we would do is we would set up this AS2 or SFTP connection to be able to make this transmission of data. So the customer's EDI system would upload upload these X12 documents, let's say an X12 PO, through to TraceLink's file transfer. What we then do is, depending on, as I had mentioned, if there is a custom version of a PO X12 transform that's in the custom catalog or the customer catalog, it will use that path. If one doesn't exist, it will use the standard version, which is just out of the box, available to you. No matter which way it goes, it will then convert back to the TraceLink's canonical. And now that purchase order can be viewed by Mint. And then on the outbound, we could do the opposite. And then we can convert from this TraceLink canonical through one of these catalogs and then back out to the customer's EDI system. So it works exactly the opposite way when you are going outbound. But at the end of the day, that's how the transforms work. All right. Now, I think we do have some time where we can run through a few of these scenarios. And these are the fun ones that I kind of like to walk through. And I think, at least for me, when I am looking at a system, I like to look at things in a very practical way. I like to look at customer problems, customer needs, and then think through what the solutions, the appropriate solutions would be for them. What would make sense? And that's actually what I've tried to map out here. And I just wanted to walk through a few of these scenarios so that we can really discuss the different integration options that we had talked through today and what we would choose. So let's start from the top and with one of the easier implementations. So if a customer is coming in and they don't manage their transactions through any ERP, any external system whatsoever, they don't have a standardized way of managing their purchase orders or invoices, and all they do is work through email or custom documents. Might be PDFs that are coming through. It might be printed out documents that they mail. So let's say we have a customer coming in within that implementation, and they don't really have an extensive number of transactions that they would need to deal with because they're already working at human scale right now. Now, what the recommendation would be is you're just starting your digitization journey if you are coming from this type of implementation over to TraceLink. So the best way to start is working at the scale that you're used to working at with a tool that provides you with this agnostic format and the standardization that you would want as you are starting to digitize. So the Mint UI is the preferred method there. Now then, let's take this a next step down. Let's say we have a customer that does have an ERP, and what they've indicated is that the biggest pain points they have is that they have a large amount of transaction data that they have to send, POs, invoices, to their partners, and all these downstream partners might have different formats that they might need to transfer to. So one might require a PDF document coming through. One might require an X12. One might require an IDOC. So that is their main pain point. Now, what they're reluctant to do is have this intermediate system like Mint to manage that transaction. So they're reluctant to move towards this more centralized digitization journey. And this is a common thread that we might see within customers that are starting this journey, because they're automating some of the controls that they would typically have through a system like this. So this is actually where we start to look at this multi-tiered approach. So there's no reason why you have to go full digitization and full automation right away. What you can do is start testing the waters through the Mint UI. You're already working at more of a single connection phase here. So working with that human scale with the Mint UI is an appropriate way to start. Now, as that has been proved out and is working, then you can start looking at these link actions and tying those into your ERP. So then you start to have this more fully automated journey within TraceLink and with your PO transmission. Since you've already connected into TraceLink, it removes this pain point of having these individual connections to your downstream partners because of our agnostic nature and our integrate once approach. And then through the link actions, that's where you start to get to that full-on automation and being able to scale up your operations towards machine scale. All right, let's go down a little bit further. So the next two examples are fairly similar. So let's look at them in a little bit of a different way. So in both of these cases, the customer has an existing EDI system that they use to transfer the transaction data to their downstream partners. Now, in the first case, the customer is utilizing an out-of-the-box X12 purchase order document. So they haven't made any customizations. They haven't updated anything. They are just using it out-of-the-box standard X12 document. Now, the second customer on this side, they've added custom fields that are company specific, that only relate back to their company. Now, if we're looking at these, as we had talked about in those transform journeys, the one that is using the standard version, they would obviously use this standard transform in our standard catalog. So this is ready for them out of the box. Whereas this customized customer that is using a variant of an X12 document would need to we would take this standard transform and then customize it for their needs, and then map that into the canonical so that it works for their needs. Because if this customer with their customized fields attempted to use a standard transform, they could, but what would happen is all this custom data that they have that's tracked here would just be dropped. It would be ignored by the transform and it wouldn't make it into Mint. Now, this custom transform allows that custom data to make it into Mint in whatever form they need. All right, now let's get a little bit more complicated. Now, these next two are also very similar. So let's say the customer is using a highly customized version of NetSuite, and then they use it to manage their transactions, like the entire POs, invoices, POACs, ASNs that are coming through the system. In the first case, within their ERP, they are working at more of a human scale. So they are only dealing with a few transactions per day. Now, the second customer has a large volume, far beyond what a person can handle through a UI. So they need a more dynamic, machine level automation system to be tied towards them. So just like we had looked at before, in this first customer that has only a few transactions, they can start by utilizing the UI. And as their operations scale and they have more than a few transactions, or they want to automate out the approach so that they're not entering in the data, or they're just working in their NetSuite instance, then we can move over to custom transforms. We could also look at link actions, but in this case, since they are since they are only dealing with a number of transactions a day, custom transforms usually will solve the problems. Now, in this large volume instance, that's where we would want something that is much more highly dynamic. Since they're dealing with highly customized versions of NetSuite and they have a large volume, then we would want to automate it out in a more dynamic and machine level scale, and that's where link actions would come into play. Let's continue that thread with a highly customized version of NetSuite for managing the transactions. So in this case, they want to use Mint to have an easier method to work with their less technologically advanced partners, but they're worried about that data loss or that they get from automating. This is a common thread that we would typically see with customers that might be concerned about automating out their approaches, that they lose that control and they want that reporting. So in this instance, if you want to integrate, you would one of the great approaches for the initial time is to have these custom transforms. And what I would recommend is utilizing a transmission method like an AS2 connection, because that gives you the logging. So the logging will allow you to be able to monitor the automation. And you feel a little bit better that the data is transmitting as it's supposed to. And then in the long term, you can look at link actions to be able to automate out the approach once the comfort level is there. Now, their downstream, less technologically advanced partners would most likely then use the UI, because the UI is available to them, where they might be used to dealing with PDFs that are transmitted by email. All right, last one. In this case, we have a MS Dynamics 365, let's say Business Central implementation, and they manage their transactions that way. Now, these customers, they work with partners that don't have ERPs, that don't want to use the Mint UI, but they don't also want to manage the data transmission themselves. They don't want to maintain those individual connections to the partners, and they want TraceLink to basically handle the entire sync back and forth. Now, for this customer, we would probably target link actions towards MS Dynamics 365. So that will bring it into Mint. Then we can look at different methodologies for exporting out to those downstream partners. That could be through custom transforms that automatically send the data through. It could be through email transmission, sending the documents that way. So no matter how we need to send data in and out, we can make that happen. Now, just to be cognizant of time and open up for questions, I just wanted to cover one quick thing just to harden this message that we are having. I'm not going to go through these scenarios. What I really want to show you is this top piece. So the message that I'm trying to relay here is that this isn't an all or nothing approach. If you choose link actions, you can have a mixture of things depending on what your downstream partners need or what you need. So in this case, we have a customer and a partner both utilizing NetSuite, and they want a full customized integration. Now, in this case, we might explore link actions inbound and link actions outbound, and that was the approach that we took when we looked at that architecture. So that is a possibility that you can do. But let's say you have on this side, you have the customer with a NetSuite instance and the downstream partner has SAP. Now we might look at a link action for the NetSuite integration, but a more traditional way of connecting with SAP might be through the custom transform. So transforming it into an IDOC and then sending it through to their SAP instance. And we might enable that through an AS2 connection. So you can mix and match the link actions with the AS2 connection. And then you can even get broader. So you might have dozens of different partners that you are working with. And maybe you are working with an MS Dynamics implementation and you might be connected into Mint through link actions, but your partners might be a mix. They might have, in the case of an SAP instance, they might be utilizing a transform. The different partners in NetSuite or in Infor might have a link action that is automatically connecting into the system and pulling it into Mint, and then sending it over to your MS Dynamics implementation through a link action. You can mix and match these depending on what your partner's needs are. Likely up here, you might have another partner that just utilizes the UI. So they wouldn't even have anything here. They would just connect directly into Mint. So what I'm trying to say is that it's not an all or nothing approach. There are different scenarios and different reasons why you would connect in with a different integration method, a transform, a link action, or the UI, utilizing that. There's different scales that you're working with, whether you need to work at a human scale or a machine scale, where you have just too much data coming in. So that's why this integration approach of looking at it from the UI, from just working directly within the UI, to more of that machine scale approach through the transforms, or getting a highly dynamic version of the transform with the link actions. And that completes the integration journey, and hopefully provides you with everything that you need in order to work directly with TraceLink in the way that you choose on the system that you choose to integrate with. All right, so I've said a lot during this time. I think we have about 10 minutes left. I wanted to open up for questions.
Thank you so much, John. That was really interesting. I'm just going to jump in first, if you don't mind. I've just got a couple of questions
Absolutely.
about the partners specifically. I guess just from a partner perspective, what do they see on their side on the UI? Is that something that is defined based on, whether they're a TraceLink customer or TraceLink partner?
Yeah, that's actually the beauty of a lot of these integrations. When I was talking through the Mint UI, I always like to include it for specifically this reason, is that the Mint UI becomes the TraceLink center point of all the data coming into the system. So what the customer will see, whether they are using the UI or they have a transform or they have a link action, is they will see the same thing. All the data that is transforming in, you will be able to access it through the Mint UI, and it will look exactly the same. I like to think of these as just 3 different modalities to do the exact same sort of thing. At the end of the day, they are doing the exact same thing.
Thank you. Yeah. I guess also in terms of their configuration though, do they do it themselves, or is there any support they receive from TraceLink?
Sure. Let me zoom back a little bit in this, because I'll bring up this this thing during the configuration. So there are 2 ways of handling this. Now, right now, what we have available is these configurations that happen within to set up the link actions or to set up the transforms. You can work with a service partner to be able to set up these connections. So what we're going to request is just a way of connecting into the system. And usually the way that we can do this is through a service account. I like to have utilize something called the least privilege principle. So a service account is a great way of doing this. Is you create a user that is dedicated towards this process, towards these link actions, and they are restricted to only access the data that it absolutely needs to get its job done, and that's it. Now, and the reason why you wouldn't just use a user or an admin account is a typical user, they might leave the company and then your link action stops working. You might need, at some point, you might want to just disable the connection, and we can disable it, or you can just disable the service account user and it stops working. You definitely do not want to use an admin account because it has too many privileges. So the link action could do too many things within Dynamics 365. So these are just standard security practices that any integration I would recommend using. So I'm going into a little bit more detail than what you asked, but ultimately the services team at TraceLink would help you set this up, would help you configure everything and get your link action configured and set up. Now, as part of our more of a content release that will be going through to a FutureLink Barcelona happening next week, you will see different documents that will allow you to create these for yourself and to be able to configure them for yourself. So this will be our next phase in the link action and transform journey, is that partners and customers really anyone can take up this mantle of creation of these link actions as well as the transforms themselves and configure them and deploy them. So take a look for that content as we get through to FutureLink Barcelona.
Great, thanks, John. And sorry, I kind of stepped in there, but does anyone on the line have any questions? I think Jessica, Jean has left, but Bruno.
No, thank you. Yeah, the explanation was very good.
Okay, and thank you so much, John. That was a really insightful tech talk, getting into more information about link actions, transforms.
That's my pleasure. I appreciate you joining. Thank you, Bruno, for joining us today. And hopefully this is just going to be the beginning of this journey with link actions. And if you ever need to have a conversation about it, you can reach out and we can start talking through some of the different integration options.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you. Thanks so much.
Great. Thank you, John. That was brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ellen.
Bye. Thank you. Bye.